Welcome to navigating the IRB process for HUT scholars. My name is Zachary. I'm a graduate student here at UCF, studying a master's in English. So I also work as a graduate research assistant with the Office of Research, and I specifically help students going through their IRB application process. So, just some quick reminders before we get into the main topic for today. But just at any point, if you do have questions about this workshop, any of the information that we talk about today, you can email me directly at zachary.miller@ucf.edu. And once again, you can also schedule one-on-one meetings with me if you want to chat more about your specific research topic. So for any methods and statistics related questions, you can email honorstatistics@ucf.edu, and you can also consult with honor statistics as well. And just want to point out that if you do have questions about any of your HUT requirements, deadlines, or anything like that, you can email honorsresearch@ucf.edu, and just make sure that you're staying aware of all your HUT deadlines. So, just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today as it relates to the IRB. We're going to talk about the HRPP purpose and goals. We're going to talk about the required research training. We're going to talk about IRB application resources, the various different review levels for the different types of research. And then we're going to go through some basic submission requirements and then wrap up with a quick walkthrough where I can actually show you how to create an application. So the HRPP purpose and goal. So how are IRB and HRPP related, right? So HRPP stands for Human Research Protection Program. And we usually just refer to this as IRB, which stands for Institutional Review Board. However, most of the time research, it only goes to the IRB if it's deemed beyond minimal risk, right? And it'll actually go to a board of scientists. They'll talk about the research and they'll basically vote and make sure that the research is fair to participants, that there are all the safeguards in place for those participants. But just to contextualize that for you. But overall, we're all about protecting the welfare and rights of human subjects in research. And we also ensure that any research conducted under the UCF umbrella is done in the highest legal and ethical standards. It's important to remember that a lot of these ethical standards come from the Belmont Report, which you may have heard of before, but it's basically a document that outlines research ethics that we use today. So the three main tenets of the Belmont Report, these are respect for persons. So a lot of times this looks like informed consent. So making sure that participants are informed completely before they actually agree to take part in research. We also have beneficence. So this is thinking about the risks of the research versus the potential benefits. So if you think about maybe your research procedure is a little bit more risky, let's just say asking some really sensitive questions. We also have to consider, is it worth it to ask these questions? Is it worth it to put maybe people through a traumatic experience, for example, based on the benefits of that research? And then lastly, we have justice. This is thinking about equity and participant selection. It's a lot about fairness, treating all participants equal, things like that. So moving on, I talked a little bit about trainings. You may have even encountered this training before already. It's called Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative. We call it just CITI training for short. This research is required for all human subjects research conducted at UCF. However, it's not required for something we call not human subjects research. A lot of things to remember in this workshop today, but I will make sure to touch back on that in the next few slides. But it is important to note that in your application, you'll list your study team. So for in most cases, for HUT students, your study team actually includes yourself, which is kind of interesting. But it's also going to include your faculty advisor and anybody else involved in the design, conduct, or reporting of the research. So for the most part, everybody's going to be required to do it on your study team. And I do want to mention that RCR training, which stands for Responsible Conduct of Research, and COI training, which stands for Conflict of Interest training, could be required for other departments, but it's important to note that the IRB only requires that human subjects research course. To get more information about how to enroll in this course, how to complete an application, things like that, it's important to have a good understanding of what the Huron Research Suite is. And the Huron Research Suite is basically our application submission platform. It's going to have things like templates for you to use. It's going to have guidance documents, and it'll have the actual application where you will upload materials from your application from your study. So basically, this Huron Research Suite can be found through the IRB webpage, which you can see this GIF on screen kind of is showing on the IRB webpage where you actually would click to access Huron IRB. You can also make use of this, the PDF that I shared in the chat. You can actually click this and it will take you to these locations on screen. So more on the Huron library. I mentioned that it houses our documents and our templates. This is just to show you a little bit more. When you get onto the Huron Research Suite, you're basically going to be able to access that library. You'll notice it automatically logs me in. If you've never logged in before, it should have you log on through your single sign-on, like how you log into everything else at UCF. But yeah, this is definitely something that you want to familiarize yourself visually. So when the time comes for you to create your application, you'll know exactly where to go. I mentioned guidance documents being in the Huron library. I've collected some that could be useful for you in your research. The very first one we have guidance for. This is the city training guidance. It will walk you through step by step how to enroll in the training, how to make sure you're taking the correct training, things like that. We also have guidance 5, which is titled Quality Improvement versus Research. So something we're going to see on the next few slides is basically how do you determine whether your project actually meets the definition of research? Well, this guidance document is going to be the top resource for you in making that determination. Guidance 8, we have advertisement and recruitment. So if you're thinking, oh, you might be actually reaching out to humans through your research, potentially posting a flyer, sending out emails, maybe to get them, maybe you want to interview them, maybe you want to survey them. This is going to be the document that you're going to want to refer to. We also have guidance 2, data security best practices. So data security is really important because a lot of research that we do, it may not be super risky, but ultimately you are collecting data from living individuals, and it's a big part of the IRB or the Human Research Protection Program is ensuring that all of those standards are put in place to make sure, worst case scenario, something happens, that there's going to be basically safeguards in place. So moving on, guidance 13, this is guidance on the secondary analysis of existing data and data sets. So let's just say you're planning on analyzing a publicly available data set as part of your research. This still might have human data in it, right? The data set could be a de-identified data set from something, maybe some research that other people did. You're still working with data about humans, but you're not necessarily contacting each one of those people whose data is in that secondary resource, right? So that's when it's important to refer to this guidance document. Moving on to the last two, we have guidance document 9. This is on payments. So if you've ever heard, getting compensation for participating in research, if you plan to use compensation in your study, you're definitely going to want to refer to this. And lastly, save the most important for last, we have guidance 7. This is the study application instructions. These are going to be really important for everybody, regardless of whether you're a HUT scholar or even an academic researcher here at UCF. This is the document that everybody uses step by steps to submit an application. And we're going to talk a little bit more about locating that guidance document, study application instructions. So once again, it's in the Huron library. You can see there I've highlighted it in this reoccurring video. I'm going to the library. I select General, and then I scroll down to IRB Guidance 7, Study Application Instructions. So what I really want you to do, if you are planning on doing research with people, right, working with data from people, interacting with people, definitely become familiar with this guidance document because it does offer step-by-step instructions for going through your application. And honestly, it's going to answer a lot of your most basic questions regarding your IRB submission. There is a very convenient chart on this document that will help you determine, based on what your research is, what templates should you use. And we're going to talk about that some more right here. So I basically taken that chart that's on Guidance 7 and put it here on the PowerPoint slide. And basically what you can see here is we have the category column, the examples of research, the corresponding protocol, and then the corresponding consent form. So really this chart is going to help you say, okay, I'm doing this type of research. It's probably falls into this category. Okay, this is the protocol template I'm going to want to use, and this is the consent form template I'm going to want to use. You can notice there's a variety of protocol templates and consent form templates. It's going to be really important that you basically choose the correct ones and make sure you're not like doing too many. I've run into students where they didn't really understand that you only pick one protocol and one consent form, and they started completing like a whole bunch of different templates. So it's always important to make sure that you're going into this with an informed perspective on what you should be doing. So um, starting off, we have not human subjects research. I mentioned that earlier in this presentation, but this is research that doesn't fit the definition of human subjects or is not designed to be generalizable. So does not meet the definition of human subjects. This is, for instance, if let's just say you were analyzing a public data set. So you're able to access it publicly online. It's probably made for research. It's de-identified, so it can't be traced back to people. If that's your plan, you would likely complete a not human subjects research application, and you would just be required to complete the protocol template. Now, we also have things that are not designed to be generalizable. So these are things like case studies, quality improvement projects, program evaluations, journalistic activities. Basically, when it comes to IRB review, a lot of this is regulated by the federal government. So when we look at applications, we look at the intent of the researcher. So is the researcher intending to produce a systematic study that ends with generalizable information that can be applied to their field, right? So if not, and you're just doing a case study, it's still valuable, right? Still provides information, or you're doing a program evaluation where you're saying, oh, there's this existing program that I'm part of at UCF. I want to basically do some research on the participants of this program to see how we can improve it. If that's your goal, you could justify not human subjects research, right? So if we move on to exempt research, so this is research that poses only informational risks. So it meets that definition of research. So it's systematic, it's meant to be generalizable, it's going to fill some sort of gap in the research that you've identified. So things like that might be exempt research. We have educational research, so things in common educational settings. We have survey and interview research. We have benign behavioral interventions, and we have taste and food quality. Sorry about that. Taste and food quality evaluations. Now you notice here the protocol and consent form sections change. For exempt research, we use the HRP 255, and for the consent form, we use the HRP 254. So I haven't really talked about like what really is a consent form, but the way to think about your protocol versus your consent form, your protocol basically outlines your whole research project. So it's going to include things like your background information, your study procedure, how you plan on recruiting people. That's your protocol. You want to think like, okay, if the protocol is complete, you can basically like hand it off to another researcher. And because you've used enough detail and specificity in your protocol, they should be able to conduct the research that you've planned to do. And when we go from protocol to consent forms, they're all about informing the participant, right? So that means we should be writing our consent forms in a tone that is directed at your potential participant. So just something to remember as we're going through here. Hopping back in here, the HRP 509, this is only if your research involves deception or incomplete disclosure. So let's just say I'm a psychology student. I want to conduct a study where the participants aren't really being told the full picture in the consent form. Sometimes that can be justified for psychology research, depending on the research questions. But the 509 here is basically like a debriefing form that would be given to participants after they go through that project that had some level of deception in it. Moving on here, we have exempt secondary research. So this is, we've talked a little bit about how some secondary research can fall under non-human subjects research, but then we have secondary research that falls under exempt. This is when you are still using that secondary data set, right? You don't need a consent form. You're not talking to each of these individuals. However, the data set might include identifiable private information, or identifiable private biospecimens. So basically, I have an example here. If your faculty advisor did some research in the past and maybe you want to do a secondary analysis of that data that they collected from their research, if the faculty advisor still has access to the identifiers in that data set, so the names of the participants, maybe their email address, things like that, we would consider that identifiable private information, and for that reason, you would complete an exempt secondary research application. And once again, I know this can be complicated at times. You can always reach out to me and chat about it, and we can come up with a plan together. I do want to point out that exempt secondary research, we see social media research. Sometimes students think social media, it's publicly accessible. I can go, Google somebody and find their social media account. If it's public, right? However, based on, regulations and whatnot, we've deemed social media data as a little bit riskier. Therefore, you should go through the exempt secondary research route. You'll notice there is a different protocol here, and then there is no consent form because you're not reaching out to people and consenting them for the research. Moving on, I'm going to kind of group these last two together, but we have expedited and full board review. Expedited review, this is basically the research is still minimal risk, which means you're basically asking people to go through things that they might encounter in daily life. So, for instance, like routine medical checkup, things like maybe being asked some psychological questions. You can justify that these are things that ordinary people probably encounter in their daily life. But however, because it's still it might be working with vulnerable populations, or you might be asking questions about psychological risk, or you might be taking health metrics. We put this in the expedited category. You notice there is a different protocol form, the HRP 503. There's a different consent form, the HRP 502. Then we have some things that are not always required, right? Any sort of research that involves adolescents or people that can't consent for themselves, they automatically become expedited, right? And you'll have to use this form, which is basically given to legal guardians to basically consent for that individual. We can see, of course, deception can be part of expedited research as well. Okay, you'll notice that the protocols and consent form templates for both expedited and full board review are the same. So basically, if your study's risky, you're going to do it as expedited. Let's just say it's deemed that it's probably greater than minimal risk, and you're putting people through situations that there's a good chance that they would not likely encounter in daily life. That is when a study will go to what is called the IRB, where they'll actually discuss this. A panel of experts will discuss the research, and they'll come up with a plan to make sure that all the safeguards are in place to ensure that this research leads to positive outcomes for human research participants. So, all right. Moving on here, I want to talk a little bit about some basic submission requirements that are going to be important for you in your application. So for undergraduate researchers, it's important to consider that you can't serve as principal investigator of your study. I know that probably doesn't make a ton of sense right now, but basically your thesis chair, which you may or may not have landed on yet, they're going to be ultimately responsible for the conduct of your research. They're going to be the person that submits your study, who double checks on all your paperwork, right? So this doesn't mean your faculty advisor is going to be, filling out your protocol form and everything. They might be helping you, but they are ultimately responsible. So prior to submitting, you should always make sure that both you and your faculty advisor have agreed that your application is meeting basic submission requirements, which we can see here on the right side of the screen. So the main thing, or the main idea here is that all documents are in the right location, right? I haven't actually showed you the application yet. We're going to do that once we get to the end of these slides here, but all documents are in the correct location. All documents are complete and do not have any track changes or comments on them. All documents are in the correct version and are used, and basically you use the UCF provided templates. I want to just touch on that again. So correct version, basically our templates change periodically. It's always important that you're referring back to the Huron Research Suite library for your documents, rather than, let's just say your faculty advisor sends you one over that they were using last year and it's outdated, right? Moving on, you want to make sure that your protocol form and your consent form, if it's required, are going to be uploaded as Word documents. So it should be in the Word format. Basically, if you submit in a PDF or something, that makes it so your reviewer can't leave comments or track changes on your protocol or consent form. So yeah, they'll send it back to you if you do that, if you submit as PDFs. So getting to the end here, the pre-review basic submission requirements are that all documents are uploaded. So if you're doing an interview study, your interview questions should be in the study. If you're doing a survey study, your survey questions should be in the study. If you're recruiting people by flyer, the flyer that you plan to use should be in the study. Um, yeah. So we have here faculty advisor checklist is completed. Basically, the faculty advisor checklist isn't required, because you won't have to actually check off these boxes. Your faculty advisor can use it to determine if your study is ready for submission, but basically them actually hitting the submit button, because you won't be able to and only your faculty advisor will, that basically checks off that box that your faculty advisor approves of the study. Lastly here, they're going to make sure that you have city training and everybody on your study has city training. So I do want to point out, I'm going to go back here, non-human subjects research does not require city training. So you only have to do city training if your study is going to be exempt or higher. And that the same thing goes for anybody that's on your study team. So for instance, your faculty advisor. All right. So just some last considerations before we jump into a little demo where I'm going to show you just very simply how to create an application. Um, just remember, as undergraduate students, HUT scholars cannot serve as the local principal investigator in the study. Therefore, your research mentor or your thesis chair should be listed as that local principal investigator. Another thing to remember, studies that don't meet the basic submission requirements ultimately ends up extending your review time, and can make it so you have less time to actually do your research. So it's always make sure it's important to get those basic submission requirements down. You can always check the IRB submission checklist if you want to like really make sure. And I believe it's going to have these here basically for you to review. And lastly, all protocols and consent forms should definitely be in UCF IRB template documents. Once again, IRB Guidance 7 is going to be your go-to place figuring out, making sure you're starting with the correct templates. All right, so we're going to do a little walkthrough of the Huron Research Suite where I'm going to create an application. We'll chat a little bit about the application review process, and then we'll touch on what a study modification is, reportable new information, and what study closure means. So let's see. I just have to get out of this PowerPoint. All right. So just want to make sure. Can you see my screen here? Only you can only speak up if you can't see institutional review board. Okay, great. So I'm assuming everybody can see. So this is the IRB webpage. It gets updated periodically, so it's always good to check back. We're always trying to provide new and better educational materials for our researchers at UCF. So just to point out here, we do have some getting started information that could be beneficial for you. Let's just say you're working with a faculty advisor and they've never had the experience of mentoring an undergraduate researcher. It's definitely important, like they should probably go complete the IRB basics for faculty advisors. So there's a lot of information on here. I do also want to point out we have a frequently asked questions page, which could be helpful for you in getting started. But let's take a quick look at it. So we basically have this table of contents here that I just click on it if I want to go to a specific section. So on review types and determination, so I can see when is IRB determination not required. I can see when does my research require full board review, everything like that. I think there's maybe 80 questions and answers here. So this is definitely a good resource for you to check out. So I'm just going to move back over to the main homepage. So this is accessing the Huron Research Suite. So I'm just going to select click here for Huron IRB. All right. Just bear with me as it loads. So it's basically opened it up for me. You can see it says, "Hello, Zachary Miller." It's automatically logged me in. If you've never logged in before, it's been so long for me, I'm not sure exactly what it will look like, if it'll just direct you to log in through your UCF credentials immediately. But just know it is associated with your UCF email and password, single sign-on. So just pointing out, just a quick recap. When I'm on this main page, I just want to go over to IRB. And then if I want to take a look at my templates, I'm going to go to Library. And then here we are. Standard operating procedures, not something you're going to really need to look at, but we have our General tab. And then that's how I would access our guidance documents. So study application instructions is going to tell me what sort of templates to use. Let's just assume I am going to do an exempt interview study. So I'm going to ask some people around campus some questions. I want to do thematic analysis of what they say. So that means I'm going to use the exempt templates. So this is the HRP 255 request for exemption. So if I just click that, it's going to download it for me. And then the HRP 254 explanation of research. So this is the consent form that explains the research to participants. Okay, so now I'm just jumping over to basically like a staging software where I can create an application without actually creating one. Let's just assume I've created all my study documents. So I filled out my protocol, I filled out my consent form. If we keep going with the interview study, I have my recruitment materials, I have my interview questions, and yeah, that's the main thing. So basically, I'm ready to start my application. So I'm going to select IRB. Oops, didn't mean to open up a new page. Select IRB. And then remember we clicked library earlier to access the templates. This time we're just going to stay on the main IRB page and we're going to select create new study. So I'm creating a new study. So this is the basic study information page. Anybody who completes an IRB application, you'll be filling out this page here. So just something to point out, anytime you're going through this application and you're not sure what to include, always refer to these little blue question marks. They're going to give you some tips for how to proceed. But just to go through this quickly, I'm going to just provide a letter just so it lets me proceed through here rather than typing out a whole study. But you're going to want to include a title of your study. You're going to want to include a shortened title, which can just be your title repeated. Let's just say your title's already short. The main thing is that you're going to want to make sure to fill this out because if you, for instance, put not applicable, it's going to read on the Huron Research Suite that your study is titled not applicable. So always put something there. You're going to give a brief description, which is going to briefly outline your study, any main research questions, hypotheses. You're going to answer what kind of study is this? So for the most part, these are going to be single site studies. Will an external IRB act as an IRB of record? No, because you're using UCF's internal IRB. Local principal investigator. You'll notice it automatically listed me here, and that's because I selected create a study application. For your case, since you're undergraduate researchers, you're going to want to select this ellipsis and you're going to be able to search for your faculty advisor here, select their name and just hit OK, and it's going to show your faculty advisor's name right here. That's really important to make sure you do that because that's how they're going to access your application. That's how they're going to be able to go in, look at your documents, and select submit. You're going to answer, does the local principal investigator have financial interest in this research? And then here you're going to attach the protocol. So this is the first area of the application where you'll be asked to upload a document. So I'm just going to go grab the protocol that I just downloaded. Let's see, it should be, there we go, the HRP 255 request for exemption. I'm going to rename it. You can name it, you can keep it that name, you can rename it if you want. It's really just whatever you do name it, it's important that you remain consistent in how you're naming things. Version number, I'm going to give it a version number 1. So I select OK, and you can see my protocol version number 1 has been uploaded. At this point, because I completed these first 8 questions, I can save my application, I can exit, I'm going to be able to return back to it, work on it when I want to. It's just important to note that you do have to complete this whole first 8 questions to actually get the system to like register your study application. Doesn't mean it's submitted, doesn't mean it's like going to be reviewed. It's just kind of like you'll be able to find your unique study number with your title of your study. It'll have your faculty advisor's name associated with it as well as your name. So instead of saving and exiting, I'm just going to continue on with the application. You'll notice we got all these new tabs here. It starts us off right below the basic information that we just filled out. So study funding sources. If your study has funding, you will include it here. If not, you'll just leave it blank. So if you do have questions in the future, you can always reach out to make sure you're filling that out right. But if you don't have any funding, you'll just leave it blank. Local study team. So this is a pretty important section. This is where you're going to identify each additional person besides the local principal investigator that is involved in the design, conduct, and reporting of the research. So for instance, the immediate thing that should come to mind to you is, oh, I got to list myself on the application, right? I'm part of the study team. So you will actually list yourself as co-investigator. You'll be able to find your name through this list. Just select it and hit OK. Let's see. I want to see if I can find my name. There's probably a lot of Millers. There I am. So let's just say I'm going to select my name. I'm going to answer this. Is the member involved in the consent process? Well, let's just say, yeah, I am consenting people to take part in my interview. I'm going to say yes. Does the team member have financial interest in the research? If you're not sure what that means, you can look more into it. I'm going to say no. Does the team member have access to private or identifiable data? I'm going to say no, because we're not going to collect any identifiable data. And here we go. You can see there I am as co-investigator. So this is what it should look like for you if you complete an IRB application and your faculty advisor is listed as the principal investigator back in basic study information. If you have additional researchers who are involved in the design, conduct, or reporting of the research, you will include them here as well with the same process. External team members, this is if somebody outside of UCF was going to be involved in the design, conduct, and reporting of the research. There's a separate process for that. It involves completing some documents that are in the templates section of the Huron Library, but if you're not sure, you can always look more into that. Moving on to study scope. You're going to answer both of these questions. For the most part, these are going to be no, but once again, if you're not sure, just look into it. Local research locations. So if your research activities are going to be taking place in a physical location, you're going to want to include that location here. So let's just say, keep going with the interview study. I want to go to local clinics and interview the receptionist to ask them about something, about their job. Basically, you're going to want to add that location here where you're going to go do that interview. Or let's just say you're inviting people to a specific location on campus to interview them. You're going to provide that location here. So I would just select add. You can select from the list of locations that are already within our system. You can see things like the Barbara Ying Center is on here. That's on campus. Biological Science Building here. So if that's not the case and you can't find your location, you are going to add the location manually. Moving on towards the end of the application here, local site documents. This is where you're going to upload every other document that you have. So we uploaded our protocol way back in basic study information, but this is where we're going to upload our consent form. So once again, it's always important to remember when you're completing these documents, think about the end user or the end reader. Basically, your consent form should be very easily understood by your target population. So let's just say I've completed my consent form. I'm going to grab it, the HRP 254 for my exempt interview research. I'm going to name it consent and give it version number 1. And there it is once again. So those are our 2 main templates that we figured out we have to use, right? Our protocol and consent form template. There are other documents that you're going to have to upload depending on your study design. So We spoke a little bit about recruiting people, right? So you're going to need to basically outline to the reviewers how you plan on recruiting people. And what you're going to provide here are the actual materials that potential research participants will encounter. So let's just say I want to recruit people for my interview study on campus by placing a flyer in the student union. So I'm going to want to select add, attach that file for my flyer, and I'm going to add the name and version number, etc. If I was going to, you know, reach out to people by email, I'm going to include a Word document that has a template of the email I plan to send. So just keep in mind any sort of process that you're going through to get people to participate in your study, it should be documented here. Other attachments are going to be anything else that participants encounter once they join your study. So okay, somebody saw my flyer in the student union. They agree, yeah, they want to scan the QR code on the flyer, and they want to participate in my interview or my survey. Any sort of information they encounter. So we're going to think like the interview questions. Um, if there's a process for maybe like scheduling the in-person interview, you're going to include that process, any documents that facilitate that process with participants. So maybe they're going to get a text reminder that says, hey, your interview session's coming up at this location, UCF main campus, anything like that. And we're going to move on to the last page here. Please select all applicable descriptions for the principal investigator on this study. So, once again, if you're an undergraduate student, you can't be principal investigator. Your faculty advisor will be. So, I know it can sometimes be confusing because the very first option is undergraduate student. However, you're going to want to identify what your faculty advisor is. So, let's just say UCF core faculty. Is this research taking place online? So, let's just say I'm doing my interviews online. I want to do them over Zoom, stuff like that. I'm going to say yes. If everything's taking place in person, I would say no. Does this research include any of the following? So let's take a look here. We have children, cognitively impaired adults, pregnant women, prisoners. These are what we determine vulnerable populations, right? So let's just say you're specifically targeting research children in your research. You're going to make sure to select that. If you're specifically targeting UCF students, you're going to select that. You know, we can see people above the age of 65. You're going to select that. But basically, I don't want you to overthink this. You know, let's just say you're not targeting these groups, but who knows? Maybe like a pregnant woman might take my survey. You're not like intentionally like targeting that population, so you don't need to designate it here. Does this research study include accessing student, employees, or medical records or requesting access to non-UCF institutional study populations? If you select yes, a fifth question will appear where it asks you to upload a copy of a permission letter or an email stating that you have approval for research access to the records or the study population. So let's just say I'm a medical student. I want to do some research. We're going to look at some medical records at a local clinic that I have ties to. You would need to select this and add a permission letter from the person that runs that clinic that basically says, yes, I have approval. The student has approval to access this data for research purposes. That's just one example. There can be other examples as well. But for now, I'm just going to select no. Will this research be conducted internationally? So if you are doing field work in another country, you're going to select yes. If not, you're going to select no. So if you're doing a survey and you're posting online and maybe somebody from another country might take it, it doesn't count as being international. All right. So I know I'm kind of giving you a lot more information than you probably need, but this will give you a good idea. So I'm just going to select finish. And we're getting to the end here. So study number, I have a unique study number now. If I was to save and exit at any time during that process, basically I would still have my study number. I would still have my title, which is just a T because that's what I put. But all because I completed that very first page of the application. So you'll notice it's still showing me as principal investigator because I didn't update it to a faculty advisor. But basically, if I'm not principal investigator, so I actually wouldn't be able to see the submit button. So for your case, let's just say you've uploaded all your documents. You're ready to get it sent over for review. You're not going to be able to select the submit button. Your faculty advisor is going to have to go on here and select submit. You can always just like copy the link and send it to them, and as long as they are listed on your study, they should be able to access it that way. You'll notice there is this little chart here. Right now, pre-submission is highlighted. In pre-submission, this means you can come back to it any time. If I wanted to go back and make changes to anything I just worked on, I can select Edit Study and do that. When I am ready, so I've double checked that my application is meeting all those basic submission requirements that we talked about. Um, I can go ahead and submit my study. So I'm going to say, hey, Dr. Faculty Advisor, can you double check and make sure to submit? They'll go in, they'll select submit. They're basically going to see this. They're going to check off on these. And then your study is going to shift from pre-submission to pre-review. And basically what that means, our pre-reviewer is gonna go take a look at all the things you uploaded. They're gonna look at where you uploaded your protocol, if you need a consent form, where it's uploaded. They're gonna make sure they're all in the correct format, that the documents are clean. Um, if you don't meet the basic submission requirements, it's going to get sent back to you, and you're going to have to make those changes to make sure it's meeting the basic submission requirements. Once you meet basic submission requirements, your study will actually move on to IRB review, where an IRB reviewer will be assigned to your study. They're going to take a look. They're going to read through your protocol. They're going to read through your consent form, your study materials. They're going to do all those sorts of things. And that's why I want to touch back on, I mentioned earlier that your protocol, you should be able to hand it off to somebody and they should be able to do your planned research just by referring to that protocol. So at the moment, it probably sounds like a lot to deal with, but ultimately, when we conduct research, we want to make sure that, the plan, the strategy, everything like that is strong, is rigid, is well thought out. So whenever you go through IRB review, there's a chance that your reviewers might send you a clarification request where they might attach some of the documents you uploaded. They may have maybe left some comments for you to address or some track changes. If that does happen, you'll have to address those clarification requests and basically resubmit. So any sort of messages you get from your reviewers will be right here. It kind of shows you like a whole history of this study. So I initially created this study at 1:35, and then I submitted at, sorry, 12:35, and I submitted at 12:47. So you can see I didn't spend very much time on my application there, but um, yeah, they will give you instructions if you have to make any changes. It's going to be a matter of going and selecting edit study and updating any documents that you make changes to. Once you get approval, you will get an approval letter, which will appear right here, saying that your study has been reviewed by an IRB. This is something that you would attach in your full thesis at the end in the appendix. If you plan on like publishing outside of UCF, you would use this IRB approval letter to show that you have IRB approval to any sort of publication venues. You will also get finalized documents. And it's expected that you use these finalized documents in the research, and any changes do end up happening. So let's just say I do my first interview and I realize, oh my gosh, I forgot an interview question, or you know what, maybe I'm not asking the right question here. Um, you can't just change the question and continue on with your research. You have to do what's called a study modification, where you'll actually come back to your study workspace, you'll see your study number, your title. It'll say that you're like approved at that point. And basically, you'll have an option to create a modification, and you'll just select that. You'll be able to specify, here's some changes I'm making in my study. Here is the updated interview questionnaire. That's just an example. You can also update study team and other information that way as well. I also wanted to touch on something called reportable new information. So let's just say you're doing a study where maybe you're asking some sensitive questions and the participant basically like opts out, like decides they don't want to participate anymore. It happens. It's not something that you're in trouble for or anything, but it's expected that you report incidents or things like that back to the IRB through your application, and you'd be able to um, do that through this once your study's approved. And then lastly, finally, study closure. So I know this is really far away from you guys. I'm probably giving you too much information, but when you complete your study, when you've, let's just say you're finished with your thesis, it's all submitted, it's important that your study gets closed. And that's basically like you're letting the IRB know that the research activities are no longer taking place. Um, and there is a process for that. It's similar to creating a modification. But anyways, you can always reach out if you have questions about that. So let's see. We're about an hour in. Um, so that's pretty much all I was going to show you here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.